So just letting you know, I'm preparing my course from complete beginner in After Effects up to some advanced stuff. So if you want to get notified about the course and sign up for a free webinar that I'm gonna host, you can sign up at filmmakersvfxguide.com. I'll send you an email once I'm ready to launch, and you can attend my free webinar even if you don't want to buy it. Head down to the link in the description below. Thank you very much, and let's get on with it. There are better tools to track surfaces that change perspective, skew, position, and scale than the built-in AE tracker. This tool was only recently made available directly as an effect that you can place on a layer. Previously, you had to enter it only from the animation toolbar on the top. Ladies and gentlemen, the Mocha AE. This fantastic tool can be a little confusing at first, and it seems daunting to use, especially with the old interface, just like After Effects probably was the first time you saw it. We'll cover everything necessary that you'll need to successfully track almost any surface you want to. Here are a few very important things / checkpoints before you start tracking that will save you tons of angry thoughts and maybe one existential crisis. So first one of all, set your tracked footage to the resolution of your composition. That means the scale should be set to 100%, and if the composition is 180p, the clip should be 180p. If you often work with 4K footage on 180p timeline, just pre-compose the layer and move all attributes. That way you'll have 180p footage to track. Second one, set your footage to the highest preview quality, full. That way Mocha is working with as much detail as possible. Third one, the footage you're trying to replace has the same proportions as the track plane. So for example, if the phone screen you're tracking is 4:5, you should have a 4:5 image. Otherwise it will be stretched to match the ratio. Unless you don't have any specific proportions in mind, like adding a sign on the wall. I don't care if it's 16:9 or 4:5, I just want it to have its original proportions. There is a way to do that as well, and we'll cover that. Fourth is optional but helpful. The layer you're going to use to apply the tracking data to should be the same size as composition. This is because when you pre-compose, the anchor points of the layers match. If you don't want to do this step, there's a fix after, so we'll cover it later in the tutorial. Okay, so let's head down to the Mocha. I prepared a few examples. Let's first check out the Mocha interface. Add the Mocha AE effect to the layer, open up the Mocha, and this is what you're gonna see. So this is the newest Mocha interface. It's called Essentials, and if you click right here, you can see how it looked before. This doesn't look really friendly, so let's get back to the Essentials. This interface is actually pretty new. I think it was introduced in CC 2019. But first, let's go through all the tools that you're gonna see here. Here are a few things besides obvious control, like a pick tool, hand tool, and zoom tool, which behave just like in the After Effects. Just as a reminder, you can use a hand tool or the shortcut X to move the footage around. The pen with a small X is an X-spline layer tool. This is how you draw and show the Mocha which plane you're going to use. Remember, the track plane does not have to be the same part of the image that you're going to replace, because the Mocha AE is a planar tracker. This is what we're going to track. And just like in After Effects, when you click and hold, you can pick different tools, and that goes for every one of them that has this small triangle. First one is obviously the X-spline layer tool. The second one is add spline to a layer. This is because after you draw one plane and you start drawing the other, you can see that right here they are showing up as separate layers, and they are going to be treated as two different sets of data. Okay, the next two, create Bezier layer tool and add Bezier spline to a layer. They behave just like the X-spline tool, you just use them differently. So if you have the X-spline layer tool, when you draw, you create hard edges, and you can see that the blue dotted lines are straight. And with the Bezier tool, if you draw, it automatically creates curves. So they have same functions, just different way of drawing splines. Choose whatever you feel more comfortable with. So the next two buttons are for creating different shapes, but ultimately they all do the same thing. Create a spline, and with it the surface which you'll be tracking. So you can play around and see which one you like. So the next one is show planar surface. This visualizes the actual tracking data. So the corners of the corner pin are going to be exactly in the corners of that blue rectangle. We'll use it after we've successfully tracked the plane, so don't worry about it for now. Show planar grid. This helps us visualize the plane we tracked and helps us verify if the tracking results look any good. Next one is expand the planar surface of selected layers to fill the entire frame. So this stretches that blue box to fill the entire frame. You can see that the corners are right in the corners of our composition. And it's worth mentioning that the frame that we stretched the tracking surface matters. We want to remember if we stretch it on the first frame or, for example, 50th. But don't worry about it for now, we'll cover it later. So under your tools, there is a layers panel where you can create layers that store data about planes you're tracking. So the same plane can have multiple layers. If you want, for example, let Mocha know that it should subtract something in that area from tracking a calculation, like a finger hovering over the cell phone screen, it would ignore the finger and track the surface properly. Subtracting the tracking data will be covered in a different tutorial. Here you can toggle the visibility of the layer, and under the cog you decide whether you want to calculate that layer in a current tracking. So if you already tracked the layer and you want to track another spline and you don't want it to recalculate that previous one again, you could just turn off the cog and it will ignore that layer in the tracking. If you lock the layer, you cannot edit it anymore. So it's useful if you're done with that track and you don't want to touch it. Here you can change the layer's color. As you can see, it's displaying a different color. Here you can change the color of the mat. So if you go to view, mats, you can change this color later. And here for organizational purposes, you can change the layer's name. So for example, type phone screen, and you can easily then know which layer holds which tracking data. Under that, in the Essentials tab, you have all the properties you want to track. So you can pick transformation, scale, rotation, skew, and perspective. These are track buttons, so you can choose to track backwards, track forward, or to stop the track altogether. Link to track is useful when you want to combine multiple layers. So for example, if you want to subtract some area from tracking, this is where you would link the two together. Below that, the same surface options that are in the tools menu, and they have exactly the same function. In the layer properties, you can set in and out points of the tracking, so the beginning and the end of the tracking. So in the blend mode, you can add to or subtract splines from layers, like the finger over the phone I've mentioned. So if you want to subtract some area, you just pick subtract and it's gonna ignore that part. Insert clip is just a temporary graphic, so it helps you visualize tracking data and you can verify if it looks good. This will not render, of course. The last one is the same link to track that in the Essentials panel. Under the footage, you have the playback controls, so you can play backwards one frame, stop, play forward one frame, and play forward. In the bottom right corner, you have keyframes controls. You can move between the keyframes with these two buttons, to the left and to the right. You can create a new keyframe with this button. So you can see you can move between them. If you press once again, you can remove the keyframe. But with this one, you can delete all the keyframes in the timeline. And that one enables automatic keyframe creation. So if there is a point in time I want to switch up the shape of the tracking data, I just need to move it and it will automatically create the new keyframe. Okay, so we learned how the user interface looks, so let's see how we can use all that new information. We're going to switch the phone screen with a different footage. Okay, I created a composition that's 1920 by 1080. I'm going to drop my footage into the timeline. As you can see, the footage is way bigger than the composition. That's because it's 4K and the composition is 1080. So I need to scale it down, go to transform, fit to comp, or just Command Alt F, and it fits the composition. But it's not really 1080. It's 4K but scaled down to 50%. And to transform it into a real 1080, I need to pre-compose the footage, name it, and now it's real 1080. To add the effect, you can type in here Mocha AE or just use the effects console from Video Copilot. Add the new screen, our beautiful logo. Let's go through our checklist one more time. Track layer is the same as the composition size. Set your footage to full resolution. Done. My footage has the same aspect ratio as my track plane. I'm going to switch up. So yes, I made sure that the size of the new screen is exactly the same size as this screen right here. And the fourth one is that we need to make sure that the anchors points match. So to do that, I can fit the layer to the composition. I know it looks weird, don't worry about it. Just do pre-compose. We have again new footage that's stretched and the anchor point is exactly in the same place as the composition. Let's hide it for now. Click on Mocha AE. First of all, we need to find the frame where my track plane is best visible. I think the first one is good enough here. Then we mark the plane. We want to track with the plane, and for tracking purposes we're gonna include a little more than the actual screen because it's gonna have a lot of information just out of the edges of the track. We're gonna turn on the perspective because I know the perspective is gonna shift a little bit. To create an X-plane, we click left mouse button. To create another point, we click again, and so on until we've covered everything. And to close the X-plane, we use right mouse button. Now that it's done, we can shift roundness of the corners with these handles here. We can straighten them up as much as we can. We can move that a little bit. We don't have to be super precise, just we need to make sure that we're including everything right here. Make sure we have turned on the perspective. Let's track forward. If you weren't on the first frame, you can track backwards as well from the original keyframe, but we had it on the first frame, so we're good to go. Now click the Show Surface Tracking Data. This is the actual information we're gonna get into the After Effects. Let's zoom in a bit. I'm holding the Z key, now the X to turn on the hand tool, and now we make sure that tracking corners are exactly in the place that we want them to. To make sure our tracking data looks good, we can show grid and play our footage. As you can see, it's holding up quite well and I'm quite happy with that track. Let's stop the footage and you can do Command S, or when you're going to exit the Mocha, it's going to ask you if you want to save the tracking data, and you of course click yes. We won't mess with the matter right now, but just so you know, you can create and apply different mats, but this is not for this tutorial. Let's go to tracking data and click Create Track Data. Click next to the layer 2 and click OK. As an export option, I almost always use the corner pin with support motion blur option, and the transform would of course not cover the skew and perspective changes, so that's why we're using the corner pin data. Layer export to. This is the layer we want to export our data to, so pick stretched footage. And because it's pre-composed footage, there are no effects on it, we just leave it as is. And now let's click Apply Export. Bang, there you go. And let's make sure our workspace is only as long as our track footage. Right click, Trim Comp to Work Area, and let's play the footage. There you go. From here, of course, you would have to try to match the screen. Just a quick rundown. I'm going to cover this in different lessons, but just so you know. So let's quickly add some effects that are going to match that footage to our actual footage. Let's add a few effects. Gaussian blur, maybe 4 pixels. Let's add noise, 3% is fine. As the last one, let's try tritone. So the tritone matches the colors of the original footage, so let's pick the brightest spot about right here, and let's pick midtones, and it's gonna be, I guess, right here, and shadows, which will be the darkest, will be right here. And let's turn on the blend with original. Let's add also a tint effect, about 30%, still too bright, so let's bring down the highlights, and there we go, that looks more real. So maybe let's try what happens when your footage is not the same as your comp size, but rather just the original ratio. So open up the second composition and quickly Alt Command F, pre-compose, move all attributes, go through the footage, maybe right here, set end of the work area, trim comp to work area. So we have our footage scaled down to 1080, we have resolution set to full, have our replacement. We will not pre-comp this, it's of course the same ratio as the phone screen. Let's add Mocha AE, the same drill, open up the Mocha. Let's create the X-spline on this frame. Let's include the whole screen. Let's rename it this time. Turn on the perspective and track forwards. You can see it only tracked from this keyframe right here, so we're gonna track backwards. Now with that it's done, we're gonna show the tracking data. Let's zoom in, move that to the corner. And now you can turn on the grid, for example, and see if it looks good. Seems to be sticking very well. Okay, let's hit escape. Yes, we want to save it. We're gonna create the track data. Choose phone screen, choose corner pin that supports motion blur, pick the screen replacement and apply export. And something weird happened. Seems to be tracked well, but it's shifted. And the reason for that is that the anchor points are not matching. So all you have to do is Command C, Command V, bam. Also remember you can switch up the anchor point before we even apply the tracking data, though it really doesn't matter. The tracking data does not affect the anchor point. It just affects corner pin and keyframes and position scale and rotation. The anchor point is free for you to modify. Let's head to the third one. Okay, so this time let's try inserting some irregular shape. Also remember, the spline shape does not matter. You can track whichever point you want on the tracked surface. So let's do this right here. If your footage is 1080, you can skip this step, but this is the first of our checkpoints. So yes, we need to pre-compose that 180p footage. Our resolution is set to full. The Mocha will prompt you to switch it if you forget it, so that's handy. So this time let's, for example, put a smiley face right here, whichever shape you want. It doesn't really matter. So let's first add the Mocha. And of course, because we don't have the actual footage yet, we're gonna make it ourselves, so we can skip the last 2 points. So now we're gonna create a spline right here. Stretch out the corners, turn on the perspective because we know it's gonna change, we've seen the footage. There we go. Let's track forwards. Let's get back to the keyframe, track backwards. And it's gonna throw the error, that doesn't matter. Obviously it left the frame, it cannot track it anymore. But other than that, let's see how it looks. Good. So right now we know we're on frame 69, and now we're gonna click show tracking surface and we're gonna click align surface. So you might have noticed that the small blue box moved to the outside of the composition. That means it's gonna apply the tracking data to the corners. So if we have a certain footage that fills the frame, on frame 69, it's gonna be translated from there. So when we move it, you can see that the blue box is moving along with the whole footage. Okay, so let's close it. Yes, save. Let's create a new plane. Let's turn it off for now. So we're gonna create something that should resemble a smiley face. First, we have to make sure we're on frame 69. And to do that, you just type in 69. Bang, we're on frame 69. Let's create smiley face. Switch them all to subtract. Maybe something that resembles a smiley face, but life happened. We create a track data. Let's pick corner pin. Let's choose smile, use effects and masks. We use the masks, and there you go. Let's play back. If you don't want to use the apply to effects and masks for some reason, let's jump back to the frame 69. We can pre-compose that footage, move all attributes, and apply export. And you can see it works just as well. You can replace almost any surface. It only seems scary at first, but after you understand it, it's really pleasant process. Don't forget to sign up for the free webinar during the launch. It's going to be the first link in the description below. Hit me up with any questions you might have, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya.